Hello.
Hello, good afternoon. I hope everyone can hear me okay. My name is Russell Bermel. I handle special projects for World Central Kitchen. Thank you all for joining us. We're joined here today with Nate Mook, the CEO of World Central Kitchen, a dear friend of mine and my current boss. So I will be on my best behavior during this discussion. Nate began his career as a tech entrepreneur and later worked as a documentary producer, leading film productions around the world for the United Nations, USAID, and the World Bank. He produced the film Baltimore Rising for HBO. He previously developed and spearheaded TEDx events in numerous countries and was actually selected as a Gates Foundation Change Hero for his work with TEDx elevating voices in underserved communities. Nate began working with Jose Andres and World Central Kitchen in 2012, and together they produced a PBS National Geographic documentary on Haiti in 2015. Nate led World Central Kitchen's food relief efforts in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria in September of 2017 and ultimately became the CEO in 2018. Since then, Nate has led the organization's dramatic growth and strategic shift to its current work using food as a solution to humanitarian crises around the world. So it's my incredible honor to have Nate here. As mentioned in his bio, World Central Kitchen has absolutely grown tenfold in the last decade since its inception. A significant portion of that growth occurring during your time as CEO. What started out as Jose, traveling to Haiti after the 2010 earthquake to help has turned into a global operation with millions of meals distributed to every corner of the earth. How has World Central Kitchen's work changed since you came on board around the time of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, Nate?
Sure. So before I answer that, just want to say thanks so much for having me to the Gates Foundation, the Greater Giving Summit. It's really great to participate. Hopefully many of you watching also were able to enjoy Jose previously. So and I can add a little bit more, more information and more background on World Central Kitchen's work, of course, in the process. So really an honor to be here. So Russell, to answer your question, I actually want to go back in time a little bit, back to 2010, when Jose landed in Haiti after the big earthquake. This was really a formative time for the organization, but I think one of the things that's most important about it actually is not how this was sort of the beginning of a nonprofit and a beginning of where we are today, but actually really a learning experience for Jose. He went to Haiti really to see how somebody like himself, a chef who owned restaurants and came from the private sector and was an entrepreneur, could look at some of the challenges around food and and play a role in addressing those challenges around the world, looking at where his expertise and his experience could come into play. But I think one of the biggest takeaways that he had in that moment was actually, really one of being humbled in that, you can't sort of go to a place like Haiti and say, all right, I'm going to come in and I have all these answers and I know all this stuff and I'm going to come in and bring a solution in. But rather you have to listen and learn learn from the communities in which you're hoping to work. So when Jose got on the ground, there's I think one of these moments, there's these moments in time that kind of shaped your life. And I think for Jose, he was in a displaced persons camp in Port-au-Prince, and he was preparing food for the camp, helping cook rice and beans and things like that for the camp. And these women came over to him in the camp and they said, Jose, we're really appreciative that you're here and you're helping out. And all these people have come to help us, and we've lost our homes and our community, but you're not making the beans right. And, I think it was a moment where you could either sort of take that and say, what are you talking, like, I'm a famous chef and I'm, here and to do all this work and, and sort of take it personally. But Jose said, no, you're right. Like this is your community. You show me how to cook and I will, work to learn from you. And, they, in Haiti, they like sort of the beans pureed, not sort of just like black beans, but like a sauce almost. And so they got like a sack, like from rice, and were able to push it through. But I think it was a moment that really sort of defined World Central Kitchen's work into the future, because we talk about this a lot. Like really starting from a place of empathy, starting from a place of understanding and learning, not going in like saying, I'm coming in, I'm parachuting in with a bunch of solutions, but rather getting on the ground and saying, okay, what's needed and how can I support and how can I actually amplify the existing voices, the existing work on the ground. So this is really what happened when we landed in Puerto Rico in 2017, which I think was, certainly a big defining moment for World Central Kitchen. It was in my life. I did not expect landing in Puerto Rico with Jose that it would, alter the trajectory of where I was going and I was headed, and a new direction for World Central Kitchen at large. But when we landed, what we saw was that there was no access to food, water, electricity, communications were very limited. And we knew that we just wanted to start somewhere, start to do something. And one of the first things that we did was we ended up in one of the local food distributors. It's what do chefs know how to do is they know where to find food. And there wasn't any power, but we were able to work and arrange to get food. And we started small. It was about working with the community, working with local chefs. We activated a friend's local restaurant, just serving the community of about 1,000 people in Santurce and San Juan in Puerto Rico. And this was like one of our first charts that we wrote up, where we were delivering to some hospitals and some elderly homes, on the senior homes on the first days of the operation. And from there, we just scaled up. We went from about 20 volunteers to about 20,000 volunteers. We took over a local arena, and we built this operation, really in response to the need on the ground. But we were able to hire locally, we were able to procure locally, we were able to put chefs to work. The local arena in San Juan actually turned into essentially the largest kitchen in the world. This location was churning out about 75,000 meals a day. Folks would come in the morning and stand in line to place an order for food, which we would fulfill, and they would take it back to their communities. Really it was a moment where we started to develop the model of what World Central Kitchen would start to do around the world. And it was a bit of a change from how this type of disaster response or food response work is typically done. The photo on the left is one I took of MREs. These are meals ready to eat. These are shelf stable. Our US government stockpiles millions and millions of these things. This was taken in a shelter in North Carolina. This is sort of the default mode after a disaster. And a lot of people nobody should be eating MREs except our soldiers in combat. On the right is actually a photo of what FEMA was distributing in Puerto Rico, somebody who received a box of food. Technically, maybe it checks all the boxes for the food groups, the Cheez-Its and the Baby Roots, but certainly is not real food. So for us, World Central Kitchen, we really focus on delivering fresh, prepared meals. We try to locally source as much as possible with fresh proteins and vegetables, healthy, nourishing food that folks need in the aftermath of emergencies. And, this to go back to your question around sort of how, things have changed and how we've scaled up since Puerto Rico. We've been able to take this model really across the United States and around the world. Right after Puerto Rico, we ended up in wildfires in California, serving Red Cross shelters and the firefighters that were on the front lines. Hurricanes all along the East Coast. Was delivering meals in Wilmington, North Carolina, with the local police let us use their SWAT vehicle as the hurricane was hitting. And this was down in Florida after Hurricane Michael, really being on the front lines of disasters that are taking place, the growing number of climate disasters here in the United States and around the world. So, this has really become our mission now as an organization. We sort of Jose kind of stole this phrase from the Grapes of Wrath, and altered a little bit, but it's sort of our mantra, which is wherever there's a fight, so hungry people may eat, we will be there. And over the course of the last really few years, in addition to some of our longer term work previously in Haiti, we've served well over 50 million fresh meals across the United States and across the world. So it's certainly been a dramatic change, a dramatic growth. When I joined up, World Central Kitchen was about 2 people. When Jose and I went down to Puerto Rico, neither of us were full-time employees of World Central Kitchen, and now we have a staff of about 55 and another 500 people that we sort of expand to when needed, when we're responding to some of these big disasters.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, as someone who's lived through it alongside with you, it's never lost on me to watch it come up on the screen and see how quickly, how many places it's been and how vast the reach has been. It washes over you, and it still, even surprises all of us who work alongside it. I loved the comment you made about, the Haitian locals telling Jose that he was cooking the beans the wrong way, because it truly was a humbling moment for him. And I think those values have transcended into World Central Kitchen's culture and the way we operate. Everyone who works for us is so humble, and we're so nimble, even in the sense of even, 50 people is a very, very small army for the edges of the earth that we touch. Out of everything you just showed, those were a lot of disasters. We saw, North Carolina and Puerto Rico and Haiti. But there really is a whole other side of World Central Kitchen that a lot of folks don't necessarily see in the day-to-day, because it's not on CNN. Anderson Cooper isn't interviewing Jose about it. It's not on CBS Sunday Morning. It's not in everyone's face. But much like the Gates Foundation operates, their global interest with global health and their international focus on global health and their domestic focus on U.S. education, World Central Kitchen also, has this whole disaster relief immediate, in the moment before the disaster happens. But there's a silent but deadly team that kind of runs in parallel and in tandem, and that's our resilience work. And so I would love for you to chat a little bit more about how both of those coexist in our organization, and why you think it's so important that those are being done in tandem.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great point, because it isn't always the thing that makes the front page of the magazines. But it is so critical to where World Central Kitchen began, and really our legacy as well as an organization. The moment that Jose got down to Haiti, this is what he saw, which was a lot of people cooking with charcoal and wood. And this is a challenge. Dirty cooking is a challenge all around the world. 3 billion people cook with dirty fuels like this. The World Health Organization estimates it kills about 1.5 million people a year because of issues related to this. So, from the very beginning of World Central Kitchen's roots, Jose was very passionate about looking at long-term solutions to issues like clean cooking. And that's really held to this day. So we continue to work very heavily in places like Haiti, where we transform schools from this was a school kitchen that used to be all charcoal. The walls were all black from soot, and now it's clean. Now it runs on gas. You just flick the switch and they can cook meals for the kids. So really a dramatic shift, and something that we're now working on in multiple countries around the world. We sort of break down our resilience work in 3 different areas. One of them is really focused on food security. So we have a food producer network. This launched originally in Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. One of the things that we see when we're on the front lines of disasters is we start to see what are the root causes that lead to some of the acute issues that families face during disasters like hurricanes. So in Puerto Rico, for example, the island imports 85+% of its food. So when you have a big hurricane come through that damages the port, that takes out, the ability for food to come into Puerto Rico, the island is not self-sustainable anymore, because it's not growing its own food. And so then that's what leaves people hungry. There's just not enough food, and we can't get it into Puerto Rico. So one of the things that we said was, once we wrapped up our initial emergency response operation, we said, okay, well, how do we support for the longer term? And this really is where our food producer network came from. We have over 250 grantees on the island. They're farmers or fishermen or individuals making cheese, or all sorts of things that really boosting up the local economy. We have a farmers market that we operate there. So really looking at sort of systemically, how do we sort of help uplift some of that local agriculture and food producers in Puerto Rico and beyond. And this program is now in USVI in the Bahamas and Guatemala. We also have a culinary training program. This was something very important from the early days of how do we train the next generation of chefs and hospitality workers and leverage the tourism industry. So we have an amazing culinary school in Port-au-Prince that I encourage everyone to visit as we get through this pandemic. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and it's an incredible group there. We have 2 cohorts every single year that graduate, and it's unbelievable. And as I mentioned, clean cooking remains a key centerpiece of our long-term resilience work, and something that's very personal to Jose. And I think he mentioned we work closely with the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. He himself was named an ambassador for clean cooking by Hillary Clinton some years ago, and will remain a big focus area for us moving forward.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing to know that all of that's happening, and the resilience work is so important to everything we're doing. It's kind of the underlying values beneath it. And given all of that, you've traveled the world personally as a private citizen. You've traveled the world as CEO of World Central Kitchen. Visiting these projects, being part of disasters, seeing how some of these countries rebuild after. What has been one of the most interesting places or interesting areas where there's been a World Central Kitchen activation, either during a disaster or even, what happened after it?
Yeah, I'll mention a few of them. I think there's a couple of examples that really have also helped, shape our work. So one of the first ones, shortly after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, and as we were still working in Puerto Rico, a major volcano in 2018 erupted in Guatemala, and we had never worked in Guatemala before. It was a new, that sort of international sort of emergency response work was fairly new for us. I mean, obviously we had spent time in Haiti post earthquake, but so this was, I think a new situation to sort of see how the model that we had deployed in Puerto Rico and across the US for things like wildfires could also be applicable internationally as well. And, was the same sort of approach, was get on the ground quickly, really start to assess the situation, see what the needs are, work hand in hand with the communities. This is a shelter where families had evacuated to the volcano, destroyed towns and farms and displaced thousands of people in Guatemala. And very quickly, we became the lead organization responding to the food crisis there on the ground. We identified the dots in blue are shelters that we were serving. We were feeding over 33 evacuee shelters. We activated local restaurants. We activated culinary schools to cook from as well. So they had the existing infrastructure of these kitchens, so we could leverage what was already there on the ground. And within days, we were essentially leading the entirety of the food operation in response to this major national disaster, ended up working with the government of Guatemala to really help guide the work and make sure that we were filling in the need. But even though we weren't, we had never been there before, it was, I think, a time that really was a challenge, because we had to sort of, how do we operate in a really challenging environment like this, and know that we had to move so quickly because families were impacted. And again, one of the ways we were able to do this was activating the resources that were already there on the ground. This was a local food truck. We were able to put it to work. It actually just parked right by the shelter every day, fed 3 meals a day to the shelter. They would cook different things. And so again, activating the resources that were already there on the ground. Indonesia was a really big moment for us as well. As our international work scaled up. So there was a big tsunami that hit Palu in the island of West Sulawesi, and really devastated a huge area of the community there. And we were able to get on the ground, identify a safe building that later became the hub for the international community, including the International Federation of the Red Cross and other groups that ended up joining us at our sort of headquarters setup, and then working closely with the Indonesian government. Even though we had never sort of formally been an operational in Indonesia, they saw what we were able to do very quickly to get this operation up and running and deliver food to those that need it. We were able to get food to schools so kids could get back to school. And it ended up being just an incredible moment, I think, of to show, a really a big learning experience for us of how, we can take what we do in a number of different contexts. And again, by listening and learning to the communities. So the food we were making in Indonesia obviously was very different from the food we were producing in Guatemala, but really tailored to the community. And the last one I'll mention is in Mozambique. So we ended up in Mozambique in 2019 after a major cyclone hit, and really we were faced with a number of different challenges. One of them is sort of the infrastructure damage from the cyclone, but also cholera. This was sort of our first moment of really having to recognize, how do we prepare and distribute food safely in a situation where there is this outbreak of a health crisis. And the work that we undertook in Mozambique actually really helped shape our future work with COVID. And the one last one I'll mention real quick, because it really was also a real challenging time, was the Bahamas. So Hurricane Dorian, the largest storm ever to hit the Atlantic so far, devastated the island of Abaco in the Bahamas, and the infrastructure was just flattened. And so we had to improvise. We were able to get a helicopter up from Haiti. We were the first individuals to land on Abaco after the hurricane. So as the hurricane was coming by, we were able to get the helicopter north from Haiti, and we were the only one with a way to reach the island. We were distributing meals within 24 hours. We activated a boat from Florida that we got in touch with from somebody and rented out the boat and filled it with a bunch of equipment and took it over to Freeport. So it was a lot of improvisation around, such a major devastating disaster, where in that case, there wasn't much local infrastructure standing because of the scale of the disaster. So we had to then, figure out how to logistically mobilize very quickly and leverage what we could. But again, not waiting for the perfect, just whatever we can do to get going as quickly as possible.
Amazing. I'm going to pivot for a minute to a couple of questions that are coming in from the audience. Given the group that's listening, can you share a little bit about your funding model, the funding model of World Central Kitchen? To what degree are everyday donors, including, workplace giving, a focus versus other donor segments that might exist?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we're really passionate about individual giving, and we have a huge community of individuals that really, that make the work possible at the end of the day. Prior to 2020, which was our, obviously COVID response work, well over 70% of all of our funding came from individuals giving online, anywhere from $5 to $500, but just online giving really made up the bulk of the support for our work. We don't receive government contracts. We don't, have a ton of huge foundation money coming in to support us. So it really is about the individuals. That shifted a little bit in 2020, not a lot. It's probably about 55-60% individual support still. As our work scaled up in 2020, and we were in more places and doing a lot more work, that shifted a bit, and we had more foundation corporate donors that really helped with some big support coming in, which is, really was incredible to help the work happen. So, we really look at a wide variety, but for us, it is very important to have that individual support. We really look at World Central Kitchen as an organization that's powered by the people, for sure. And, that's one of the reasons why we also share a lot about our work. We think it's super important for transparency and for people to see what's going on. So we're very focused on telling those stories in real time on our social media feeds and emails and other things. We want people to know where every dollar is going. But certainly as we look into 2021 and beyond, and the scale of the needs, I do think we are going to be expanding, to the amount of institutional support that we will need to operate on the scales at which the work is needed, especially when we look at more complex places we operate, such as Venezuela, or other places where there may not be a lot of individual giving that can support that work.
Yeah, and you touched on storytelling and how important that was, and another question came in from the audience, and Jose spoke about it during his session with Taryn about the value of storytelling in raising awareness for an issue. And I know other organizations and nonprofits, struggle with the same way to get kind of their message out. And this question, the person says, World Central Kitchen is clearly an expert at that. Was that always your goal, and how did you develop that muscle?
Yeah, some of it goes back to, I think, my personal roots as well. In the years leading up to joining World Central Kitchen, some of the first work I did with Jose was all around storytelling, was all around documentary film, was all about how do you capture the work in a way that's going to resonate with people and share it transparently. Even my work with TED previously, TED Talks is all about, okay, how do you take an idea, you go on stage and share that and connect with people emotionally and get them to really care about the work. And so, from the very beginning, from the inception of the emergency relief work that we're doing now, when Jose and I were flying to Puerto Rico, he just handed me his phone and he said, hey, we need to tell the stories, like just start tweeting, like let's just show people what's going on. And we look at ourselves as well, being on the front lines of a lot of disasters. We almost have to be like frontline reporters in a way too, because we need to be showing what's going on. And so, our teams are very adept now. They've learned over time that it's not just about, yes, the priority is getting the food to those that need it, but we also need to be the eyes and the ears and uplift the voices of those on the ground and give them, a platform so they can share, so others around the world can really see what's happening. And so it really is an integral part of World Central Kitchen's work. I mean, I see it on a day-to-day basis. It's why, as the CEO, I'm still very hands-on with our communications work, working closely with our communications team, Jose himself as well. Jose's on his own Twitter, posting stuff. We don't really look at it as like corporate messaging. We really look at it as just real-time communication. We're not going to be perfect, but we just need to be honest, and we need to tell the stories that we think that are going to resonate with folks.
Yeah, and I can vouch for the comms team of how involved Nate is on the communication level of everything. So very involved CEO on this line. Well, I want to be cognizant of time. I know we are coming to a close, but I think maybe in the next couple of minutes you touched on, that photo of Mozambique and how cholera, before we even dealt with coronavirus, how we have that unique instance of dealing with cholera and cooking food in Mozambique. There's a really great story as 2020 hit right before the pandemic that I would love for you to, I don't know how quickly you can do it, but you had a phone call from the CEO of Carnival Cruise Lines, who is a friend, partner, came to us somehow and asked you to do kind of the impossible. And of course you accepted, and we would love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll jump ahead a little bit to our current work, to our work around the pandemic. We're also in a lot of places today as well, amidst still a pandemic, and with teams in India and St. Vincent and Venezuela and a lot of places on our southern border as well. But it was. February 2020 was a very interesting moment. We received a message from Carnival that asked if we had some connections to food suppliers in Japan. And immediately I knew that this was related to the news I had seen about a cruise ship that had just been quarantined in Yokohama, Japan. And pretty early on, we hadn't really recognized the coronavirus, or what would become COVID, was going to start spreading over here. And so we really, in the very early days, found ourselves on the front lines of this work. We ended up sending a team out to Japan within 24 hours. We developed a whole plan of action to get food onto the ship because we knew that they couldn't keep cooking. The staff was spreading it. The guests were spreading it. It was a real nightmare. It was a petri dish, unfortunately, of COVID in those early days. And so we had to develop a totally new infrastructure, a new system for where we were preparing the meals, how we were getting the meals to where they were going, individually packaging everything, which has been a huge undertaking throughout the pandemic. And really, we were able to, while the rest of the world, I think, was still early days, not recognizing what was about to happen, we saw that this was going to hit the US hard as well. So we were able to start to mobilize and get plans in place. So over the past year, The World Central Kitchen team has been operational in over 400 US cities and 35 states. We've also had a huge operation in Spain, which was, of course, hit hard by COVID as well. And that includes our work on the ground in places like Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, the Bahamas, and Indonesia as well during COVID. So, you know, we scaled up, I think, to meet the needs. We, you know, could not have expected. We served well over 35 million meals last year throughout the pandemic, fresh meals to folks. And so it was really a big undertaking. And we also pivoted our model a little bit too. So we launched what we call our Restaurants for the People program. And this was a way that we saw, you know, World Central Kitchen can't be, as it were, a small nonprofit ultimately, right? At the end of the day, we can't be everywhere. But what we could do is we could leverage restaurants, which are everywhere. And we also knew at the time that restaurants were really struggling because of the economic crisis, right? So this was an opportunity for us to put restaurants back to work to feed their communities. And World Central Kitchen could sort of operate almost like an air traffic controller, right? We could sort of say, okay, here's the food, here's where it needs to go, make sure everything, coordinate that, make sure. So even if we didn't necessarily need to set up kitchens everywhere, we almost had kitchens everywhere. Jose jokes now that, you know, World Central Kitchen now has kitchens everywhere in the world, because if we have to go anywhere, all we have to do is make a phone call and we have access to that kitchen. Everybody opens their doors because this is what chefs do. This is what cooks do, right? And so we actually have this incredible, you know, really unmatched resource to feed people when needed. And, you know, the Restaurants for the People program was really part of that. We were able to channel over $150 million to small businesses that were producing meals. They produced over 15 million meals out of restaurants. So we were paying them to produce those meals. So both supporting those businesses so then they didn't go out of business and you have more people that are hungry, but also using those restaurants to produce meals for the community. So really was, you know, a new approach to us, but also one that we've now been able to activate in other places as well. We've shown that this is a model that can be very complementary to our traditional model, which is, you know, setting up our own kitchens and operating our own kitchens and getting food out to folks.
Wow. Well, thank you, Nate, so much. As the moderator, I appreciate your time. I know everyone here appreciates your time. And as your employee, I'm grateful for your passion and heart in all of this. And if anyone needs to ever get in touch with us to share any more, I'm sure the events team with the Gates Foundation and the Greater Giving Summit can make that connection. So thank you all.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Russell.